10. The KGB was more than just spies. It was an empire of fear. When you hear KGB, you probably picture men in long coats trading coded messages in dark alleys. But that's only a fraction of what the organization was. The KGB, short for Komitet Gosudarstvenoi Bezopasnosti, or Committee for State Security, was founded in 1954 as the successor to Stalin's brutal secret police, the NKVD. Its mission went far beyond foreign espionage. The KGB was designed to control every aspect of Soviet life, from the thoughts of its citizens to the ambitions of its politicians. Inside the USSR, the KGB monitored phone calls, opened mail, and planted informants in factories, universities, and apartment buildings. Even your best friend, your professor, or your spouse could secretly be reporting to them. It wasn't paranoia, it was policy. Historians estimate that by the 1980s, 1 in every 10 Soviet citizens had some connection to state surveillance. This meant that fear became a daily part of existence. People whispered instead of speaking. A casual joke about the government could earn you a late-night knock on the door, and you might never come back. But the KGB wasn't just about punishment. It was also about manipulation. The agency's psychological tactics were legendary. They didn't only destroy dissidents physically but mentally. Agents would spread rumors to make critics seem insane, send anonymous letters to ruin marriages or ensure someone was fired without explanation. They called this active measures, subtle psychological warfare against their own people. To the rest of the world, the KGB was the face of the Iron Curtain, secret, disciplined, and everywhere. But to Soviet citizens, it was something even more powerful, the reminder that Big Brother wasn't watching sometimes. He was always watching, and this iron-fisted approach gave rise to one of the most formidable spy networks in modern history. Sucker 9. The KGB's spies operated in almost every country on Earth. While the CIA was setting up covert operations in Latin America and Asia, the KGB was busy building a global web that stretched from Washington to London to Tokyo. By the late Cold War, the Soviet Union's intelligence network had agents or informants in nearly every country on the planet. Some were trained professionals from the USSR, but many were recruited locals, politicians, journalists, or businessmen, who believed in the communist cause or were simply lured by money, ideology, or blackmail. One of the KGB's greatest strengths was its ability to recruit insiders. Instead of trying to sneak spies into foreign governments, it preferred to turn people already there. The most famous example, the Cambridge Five in Britain. In the 1930s, 5 well-educated young men from Cambridge University, Kim Philby, Donald MacLean, Guy Burgess, Anthony Blunt, and John Cairncross, were recruited by Soviet intelligence. Over the next several decades, they would infiltrate the British government and pass thousands of classified documents to Moscow, including top-level NATO secrets. The revelations of their betrayal shocked the Western world and became one of the biggest spy scandals in history. But the KGB's reach wasn't limited to Europe. In the United States, Soviet agents managed to steal details of the atomic bomb program through a spy ring that included physicist Klaus Fuchs and Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Their work gave the USSR the knowledge to build its own nuclear arsenal, ending America's monopoly on atomic weapons and forever changing the balance of world power. KGB spies operated under various covers: journalists, diplomats, scientists, even cultural attachés. Some lived under false identities for decades, so deeply embedded that they raised families, built careers, and only revealed their true allegiance when the Cold War ended. One declassified KGB manual revealed their motto: "The best spy is not the one who steals secrets, but the one who shapes the truth." This philosophy made the KGB not only dangerous but unpredictable. They didn't just gather information, they crafted entire realities. Through propaganda, forgeries, and disinformation, they manipulated public opinion, weakened Western alliances, and planted seeds of doubt that sometimes took decades to uncover. And yet, for all their global reach, the KGB remained firmly loyal to one thing: protecting the Soviet regime at any cost, even if that meant turning their most gifted agents against their own people. Chapter 8. The KGB turned espionage into a science. If the CIA played chess, the KGB played 4D chess, where every move had psychological weight. Unlike many Western intelligence agencies that focused on gadgets, technology, and field missions, the KGB perfected the human element. They believed that the most powerful weapon wasn't a gun or a code breaker, it was the mind. The KGB trained its operatives in psychological manipulation so deeply that their methods could rival a therapist's insight or a magician's misdirection. In their training academies, like the infamous Yuri Andropov Red Banner Institute, recruits learned not only languages and surveillance but also psychological conditioning. They studied how to read body language, trigger trust, induce fear, or plant ideas so subtly that targets thought they were their own. A classic KGB recruitment method was called the honey trap. It involved seducing foreign diplomats or officers into compromising situations, often with hidden cameras rolling. Once the KGB had photos or recordings, the victim was given two choices: cooperate or face public ruin. Some of the most confidential NATO information of the 1970s came from officials ensnared in these traps. But the psychological reach went further. The KGB used a tactic known as reflexive control, a mind game designed to make opponents take actions that benefited the Soviets without realizing it. They'd feed bits of true and false information to Western intelligence, so that analysts would make predictable decisions planned by the KGB from the start. Even their own citizens were manipulated through active measures, disinformation campaigns that blurred the line between truth and fiction. If the West called the USSR oppressive, the KGB would circulate forged documents or plant stories showing Western hypocrisy, stories that newspapers and even governments sometimes believed. For the KGB, lies weren't just tools. They were weapons of strategy. They once forged a letter allegedly written by the head of the CIA to African leaders plotting racial divisions. The forgery went viral across Africa, turning many neutral countries against the United States. This was decades before social media, and yet they managed to weaponize fake news long before the term existed. One American intelligence officer later remarked, "We spent billions on satellites, but the KGB could change a nation's mind with a typewriter. Their mastery of human psychology made them terrifyingly effective." But what made the KGB unstoppable was that they weren't just spies. They were also soldiers of ideology. They believed they were fighting not just for information, but for the fate of the world itself. Number 7. The KGB could destroy lives without firing a bullet. In the Soviet Union, the KGB's power wasn't limited to the battlefield or foreign embassies. It extended into every corner of daily life. One of their most chilling abilities was to make people disappear without a trace. Critics of the regime, writers, scientists, priests, or even comedians, could be labeled as anti-Soviet elements with no trial, no evidence, and no defense. Once the KGB branded you an enemy, your fate was sealed. Some were sent to psychiatric hospitals where doctors, under KGB orders, diagnosed them with sluggish schizophrenia, a fake illness invented to silence dissent. Others were exiled to Siberian labor camps, and many were never heard from again. A haunting example is the case of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Prize-winning author of The Gulag Archipelago. His book exposed the horrors of Soviet labor camps, and the KGB saw it as an existential threat. They orchestrated a nationwide campaign to destroy every copy, intimidate anyone who had read it, and eventually arrest Solzhenitsyn. Though he was later exiled to the West, his persecution became a global symbol of Soviet censorship and the KGB's reach. But the agency didn't always need violence to win. They used kompromat, short for compromising material. By collecting personal secrets, from affairs to gambling debts, The KGB controlled politicians, journalists, and even religious leaders both inside and outside the USSR. The idea was simple. Everyone has a weakness, and the KGB would find it. They were so efficient at this that even Soviet leaders weren't immune. The KGB kept files on nearly every member of the Communist Party, including the Politburo, the country's ruling elite. They knew who was drinking too much, who had mistresses, and who had doubts about the regime. This information wasn't just for security, it was leverage. If a powerful politician started to question Moscow's leadership, the KGB could remind him of his private sins. It was power through fear and silence. You didn't have to be arrested to be broken. All it took was a rumor, a planted story, or a missing friend to remind you that the KGB was watching. Western analysts used to joke that the KGB didn't need torture chambers. They had anxiety, and it was true. They created a world where people censored themselves out of survival instinct. You didn't just live under the Soviet system, you lived inside the KGB's shadow. This omnipresent control had one chilling effect. It made the Soviet Union appear stronger and more unified than it truly was. Because when everyone is too afraid to speak the truth, it looks like everyone agrees. By the 1980s, the KGB had become so embedded in Soviet life that it was impossible to tell where government ended and secret police began. It was the ultimate form of state security, one that ruled through invisibility. But that invisibility was also its weakness. As the Soviet Union began to crack, the KGB's power started to shift in ways no one, especially the West, was prepared for. Number 6. The KGB mastered disinformation. Long before the internet, before social media trolls and fake news, there was the KGB. These agents didn't just spy, they engineered entire false realities. Their craft was known as desinformatia, or disinformation, and it became one of the Soviet Union's most potent weapons during the Cold War. The idea was simple but devastatingly effective. If you can't win a war of weapons, win the war of minds. The KGB would plant fake news stories, forge official-looking documents, and subtly manipulate journalists and academics into spreading Soviet narratives without realizing it. One of the most notorious examples was Operation Infection, a KGB disinformation campaign launched in the 1980s. Its goal? To convince the world that the AIDS virus was created by the United States military as a biological weapon. The operation began with a planted story in an obscure Indian newspaper. From there, it spread through sympathetic journalists, scientific experts, and even Western media outlets who picked it up as a genuine scoop. Within months, millions around the world believed the story. Even years later, some people in developing countries still distrusted Western medicine because of this single KGB operation. The campaign cost the Soviets a few $1,000s and cost the U.S. decades of reputational damage. That was the power of KGB disinformation, long-lasting and hard to kill. Another famous case was the creation of forged documents claiming that the CIA was behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy. These forgeries were so convincing that they appeared in multiple international publications and were cited by conspiracy theorists for decades. The KGB didn't need to make people love the Soviet Union. They only needed to make them doubt the West. That seed of skepticism, planted carefully through lies, half-truths, and forged evidence, was enough to weaken democracies from within. KGB officers often bragged that while American spies stole secrets, Soviet spies stole trust. It was a quiet war, fought not with bullets but with stories. And as we look at today's world of online misinformation, the KGB's fingerprints are still visible everywhere. But disinformation was only one side of their influence. The KGB also played an active, if hidden, role in global politics, funding revolutions, training foreign leaders, and even trying to manipulate the course of entire nations. Number 5. The KGB secretly influenced elections and governments worldwide. Long before the age of social media bots or election hacking, the KGB had already perfected the art of political manipulation. Their mission wasn't just to defend the USSR, it was to export its ideology. From the 1950s to the 1980s, the KGB funded and supported dozens of left-wing and communist movements around the world. In Africa, Asia, and Latin America, Soviet agents provided training, weapons, and propaganda materials to groups that could advance Moscow's interests. They helped establish pro-Soviet governments in countries like Cuba, Angola, and Afghanistan. In some cases, they even orchestrated coups or assassinations. Declassified documents later revealed that the KGB had tried to influence elections in France, Italy, and West Germany by funding communist parties and spreading scandals about pro-Western politicians. One particularly bold operation involved the 1968 U.S. presidential election. The KGB feared that Richard Nixon would take a harder line against the Soviet Union, so they tried to secretly support his opponent, Hubert Humphrey. Soviet ambassadors in Washington sent back desperate memos suggesting ways to covertly assist the Democratic candidate. Though the plan failed, it showed how early and how aggressively the KGB sought to manipulate global politics. And their tactics weren't limited to propaganda. The KGB trained an entire generation of intelligence officers in influence operations, the subtle art of controlling key individuals in foreign governments without them realizing it. By providing money, favors, or blackmail material, the KGB could quietly steer decisions from the inside. One of the most chilling examples was in Eastern Europe, where the KGB maintained complete control over local intelligence agencies. Leaders in East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia often reported directly to Moscow. The infamous East German Stasi, for instance, was essentially a clone of the KGB, ruthlessly efficient, technologically advanced, and completely loyal to Soviet interests. Even in the Middle East, the KGB played puppet master. They supported Yasser Arafat and the PLO with training and intelligence, supplied weapons to anti-Western militias, and cultivated spies within Western-friendly Arab governments. But the KGB didn't only use force, they used culture. Through front organizations and fake charities, they funded peace movements and anti-nuclear campaigns in the West, not out of love for peace, but to weaken NATO's military cohesion. Their agents were everywhere: universities, newsrooms, labor unions, and even churches. A 1982 CIA report estimated that up to 15% of Western anti-peace activists had direct or indirect ties to Soviet intelligence. Many of them had no idea they were being used. This global manipulation created an illusion of moral superiority for the Soviet Union. It made Moscow seem like the defender of the oppressed and the West like the aggressor. It was geopolitics as theater, and the KGB wrote the script. What makes this even more fascinating is how they operated with a kind of cynical patience. They didn't need immediate results. A whisper here, a forged letter there, a planted journalist. These were slow-burning fuses that could ignite years later. By the late Cold War, even Western politicians joked that KGB agents probably had better polling data than their own campaign teams. And they weren't wrong. This blend of disinformation and political manipulation turned the KGB into something more than a spy agency. It became a hidden hand shaping the modern world. But as the 1980s wore on and the Soviet Union began to crumble, the KGB would face a crisis it couldn't control: the collapse of the very empire it was built to protect. 4. The KGB's defectors exposed the dark heart of the Soviet regime. For decades, the KGB operated like a ghost, unseen, unchallenged, and untouchable. But the cracks began to show when its own agents started turning against it. Some of the most shocking revelations about the inner workings of the Soviet Union didn't come from Western spies. They came from KGB defectors. One of the most famous was Oleg Gordievsky, a high-ranking KGB colonel who secretly worked for Britain's MI6. For over a decade, Gordievsky fed the West crucial intelligence on Soviet operations, helping to prevent possible misunderstandings that could have led to nuclear war. His insights were so valuable that British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher herself once called him our greatest hero of the Cold War. Gordievsky's reports revealed chilling details about how deeply the KGB manipulated both foreign and domestic politics. He described how the agency spread paranoia within the Kremlin, forged Western government documents, and even used Western peace groups as unknowing tools of Soviet propaganda. In 1985, when the KGB discovered his betrayal, Gordievsky barely escaped execution. He fled Moscow under the nose of Soviet border guards, smuggled out in the trunk of a British diplomatic car, a real-life spy thriller that could have been written by John le Carré. Another legendary defector was Vasily Mitrokhin, a KGB archivist who, over years of secret work, copied and smuggled out thousands of classified files. After defecting to Britain in 1992, he handed over what became known as the Mitrokhin Archive, a treasure trove of KGB secrets revealing the agency's global reach. The files exposed shocking operations, assassinations disguised as accidents, disinformation campaigns that spanned continents, and lists of Western politicians secretly targeted for blackmail or influence. Among the documents was evidence that the KGB funded terrorist groups in Europe and Latin America, including the Red Brigades and the PLO. But perhaps the most disturbing part was the killings or espionage. It was how deeply the KGB had penetrated Western society. There were spies in universities, television networks, even the Vatican. The idea that no institution was safe from infiltration shattered the illusion that the Cold War was just a standoff between armies. It was a battle for the very soul of information. Defectors like Gordievsky and Mitrokhin changed how the world saw the KGB. They revealed not just a spy agency, but a system built on deception, control, and fear. And while the West celebrated their bravery, the Kremlin saw them as traitors, proof that even the most loyal agents could be turned by the promise of freedom. But even as some fled, others rose from within, men who would later reshape the KGB's legacy in ways no one could have predicted. Number 3. Vladimir Putin, the KGB's most famous product. No single figure embodies the KGB's transformation more than Vladimir Putin. Before he became Russia's most powerful leader, Putin was a loyal KGB officer stationed in Dresden, East Germany, during the 1980s. His job was to recruit informants and gather intelligence on NATO movements. Though not a field assassin or high-profile agent, Putin was a devoted believer in the KGB's methods: discipline, secrecy, and control. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, Putin was reportedly in his KGB office as East German crowds surrounded it. He later recalled how desperate he felt calling Moscow for instructions, only to be told, "Moscow is silent." That moment shaped him forever. He saw firsthand how indecision and weakness destroyed empires. To him, the collapse of the Soviet Union wasn't liberation, it was humiliation. After returning to Russia, Putin quietly climbed the political ladder, bringing with him the mindset of a KGB operative. When he became president in 2000, he didn't abolish the intelligence state. He revived it. Many of his closest allies and government officials were former KGB officers, and they came to be known as the Siloviki, the men of force. Under Putin, the old KGB was reborn as the FSB, Federal Security Service, officially the successor agency. But in practice, it was the same machine: surveillance, political control, and psychological intimidation, just with new technology and fewer ideological slogans. The KGB's influence didn't end with the fall of the USSR. It simply evolved. Putin once said, "There's no such thing as a former KGB man." And he meant it. This continuity explains much about modern Russia's political culture: the control of media, the suppression of dissent, and the obsession with state stability. These are KGB values repackaged for the 21st century. Even internationally, many of the tactics we see today, Cyber warfare, disinformation campaigns, election interference are direct descendants of Cold War KGB operations. The methods stayed the same. Only the tools changed. What's ironic is that while the KGB once worked in shadows, its legacy now stands at the center of global politics. Every time a journalist vanishes, a critic is poisoned, or a cyber attack traces back to Russia, the ghost of the KGB flickers in the background. But if Putin represents the KGB's rebirth, there was one aspect of its past even darker than espionage: its capacity for assassination. The agency's mastery of killing without leaving evidence remains one of its most terrifying legacies. Number 2. The KGB's assassination program was cold, calculated, and almost undetectable. When persuasion, propaganda, and blackmail failed, the KGB had one final option: elimination. Their assassinations weren't just about removing enemies. They were designed to send a message: betrayal has consequences. What made them terrifying wasn't their brutality, but their precision. KGB assassins didn't just kill people, they erased them, often without a trace. One of the most famous examples was the murder of Georgi Markov, a Bulgarian dissident journalist who defected to the West and worked for the BBC in London. In 1978, while waiting for a bus on Waterloo Bridge, Markov felt a sudden sting in his leg. A stranger had accidentally poked him with an umbrella. 3 days later, he was dead. The autopsy revealed a tiny metal pellet inside his thigh, filled with ricin, one of the deadliest poisons known. The KGB had reportedly provided the weapon, a custom-built umbrella gun, to Bulgaria's secret police. This was no movie gadget. It was real, and it proved the KGB's ability to blend innovation with horror. The umbrella gun became a symbol of Cold War paranoia, proof that even an everyday object could be weaponized by Soviet ingenuity. Another chilling case involved Alexander Litvinenko, a former FSB, the KGB's modern successor, officer who defected to Britain in 2000. Litvinenko accused the Russian government of corruption and murder. 6 years later, he died from acute radiation poisoning after drinking tea laced with polonium-210, a rare radioactive isotope. British investigators later traced the poison back to 2 Russian agents with direct ties to Moscow's intelligence service. What shocked the world wasn't just the cruelty, it was the brazenness. The KGB and its successors had moved from silent assassinations to public warnings. They wanted the world to see what happened to those who spoke out. During the Cold War, KGB hitmen used everything from cyanide capsules and booby-trapped mail to car crashes and medical complications. Victims were often declared dead of natural causes: heart attacks, sudden illness, or accidents that no one questioned. But the assassinations weren't random. They followed a strict logic. Each death served a purpose: to silence, to intimidate, or to demonstrate control. Even outside Soviet borders, the KGB acted as if its authority was global. If you betrayed Moscow, there was nowhere safe. Not in London, not in New York, not even in your own living room. Western agencies learned to take every strange death seriously if a Russian name was involved. As one CIA officer once put it, the KGB doesn't forget, it waits. What made these assassinations so effective wasn't just the killing itself, it was the fear they created. Every journalist, diplomat, or defector who criticized the Soviet regime knew that one day an accident could happen. And that psychological terror was exactly what the KGB wanted. But as ruthless as it was, the KGB wasn't immortal. By the late 1980s, cracks began to form. Inside the system, inside the ideology, and even inside the men who once served it. Better 1. The fall of the KGB marked the end of an era, but not its influence. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, it wasn't just a political event, it was the beginning of the KGB's unraveling. For decades, the agency had been the backbone of the Soviet Empire, but now that empire was collapsing under its own weight. As reform movements swept across Eastern Europe, the KGB found itself fighting not external enemies, but the forces of history itself. The Soviet economy was failing, nationalism was rising, and even within Moscow, people were daring to speak the truth. The once all-powerful KGB could no longer silence every voice. In 1991, when hardline communists attempted a coup against Mikhail Gorbachev, it was KGB officers who played a key role. Their goal was to preserve the old system, but instead, the coup collapsed within days, and the Soviet Union soon followed. By December, the USSR was gone. The KGB, formally dissolved, was replaced by smaller agencies like the FSB for domestic security and the SVR for foreign intelligence. But make no mistake, the spirit of the KGB never disappeared. Many of its officers stayed in power, simply changing job titles. They carried the same training, the same networks, and the same belief that information and fear are the keys to control. The influence of the KGB still echoes through Russia's political system today. The secrecy, the propaganda, the intolerance for dissent, all are direct descendants of the organization's methods. Even the modern tactics of cyber warfare and online disinformation owe their roots to Soviet-era KGB doctrine. Former officers turned politicians, businessmen, and oligarchs, spreading their reach into every part of post-Soviet life. And as we've seen, their mindset didn't die. It adapted. The 21st century information war that plays out online daily is, in many ways, a digital resurrection of the KGB's strategies. The agency may no longer exist in name, but its lessons have outlived the Soviet Union itself. Wherever power is guarded by secrecy, wherever truth is twisted for control, the KGB's shadow lingers. As one ex-agent once said, the KGB was not just an organization, it was a worldview. And that worldview, built on manipulation, discipline, and silence, continues to shape not just Russia, but global politics. From the whispering paranoia of Soviet streets to the cyber battlegrounds of modern geopolitics, the KGB's story is not one of extinction, but of evolution. Its legacy is a reminder that intelligence agencies may protect nations, but when fear becomes their language, they start ruling them instead. The KGB remains one of history's most secretive and feared organizations, a blend of brilliance, brutality, and manipulation that changed the course of the 20th century. Its ghosts still walk through the corridors of power today, reminding the world that knowledge is dangerous and secrecy is even deadlier. If you like this video, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends, and subscribe so you won't miss our next deep dive into the world's most mysterious events. Click Join to become a channel member for exclusive content and behind-the-scenes stories. And if you want to support the channel directly, use the Super Thanks button below. Your support helps us uncover more hidden histories just like this one. See you in the next video.